Hello and welcome to WION Live Broadcast. I'm Nick Harper from Washington DC, and these are the top headlines of the day. Russian President Vladimir Putin accuses Ukrainian authorities of stalling talks, but says Moscow is ready to search for solutions during his call with German Chancellor Olaf Scholz. Cyber warfare hits world leaders. British Defence Secretary Ben Wallace was duped into a video call with whom he believed to be the Ukrainian Prime Minister, before becoming suspicious and ending the call. Russian airstrikes reported from Lviv airport region. Confirms the building hit was definitely not part of the airport, as black smoke billowed from the area. Israel appeals to the United States not to remove Iran's Revolutionary Guards from its blacklist of foreign terrorist organizations as part of a revived nuclear deal. China's southern tech powerhouse, Shenzhen, has partially eased lockdown measures after President Xi Jinping stressed on the need to minimize the impact of the coronavirus pandemic on the nation's economy. And in India, people are celebrating the Festival of Colours, with crowds amassing in huge numbers on streets to celebrate the Harvest Festival, which also represents the triumph of good over evil. China is under intense diplomatic pressure to pull its support from isolated Russia. But 3 weeks after the invasion of Ukraine, Beijing has shown few signs of abandoning its friends in the Kremlin. And today, US President Joe Biden is speaking to his Chinese counterpart, Xi Jinping, by phone. It's the first phone call between both leaders since the video summit back in November. The White House believes that it will serve as a chance to air their differences. Trade rows and snarled international supply chains are also one of the topics of discussion. But a big focus is the Western bid to force Russia out of Ukraine. Beijing has refused to condemn Russia and has rather blamed the United States and NATO's eastward expansion for worsening tensions, as the United States is spearheading the unprecedented pressure campaign on Russia. Now, the White House is piling pressure on China to not support Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The Biden administration has issued public and private warnings to Beijing about facing dire consequences if it provides material support to Russia's war. This is what Joe Biden had to say about the upcoming phone call.
I think we're at an inflection point in history. I think, and I mean that sincerely, it occurs every several generations. I think we're in a genuine struggle between autocracies and democracies, and whether or not democracies can be sustained. And I'm going to be speaking to President Xi tomorrow, and he'll remind me that I told him, he remembers every damn thing I've said, unfortunately. But all kidding aside, we talked about the idea he does not believe democracies can be sustained in the 21st century. Because things move so rapidly, technology is changing so much, democracies don't have time to arrive at consensus. That's why autocracies will succeed.
Well, Biden has assembled a tight Western alliance against Russia, while also giving military support to Ukrainian forces. But Beijing has refused to condemn Moscow. As recently as last week, Beijing called the partnership between the two countries rock solid. There are also reports that Russia has reached out to China for aid as it faces sanctions from around the world. The reports have been denied by the Kremlin. But Washington fears that the Chinese could switch to provide financial and even military support for Russia. The White House is tight-lipped on whether Biden will threaten China with sanctions during his call, but some sort of response is on the table. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken confirmed that Washington will make it clear to China it will bear responsibility for any actions it takes to support Russia's aggression.
We believe China in particular has a responsibility to use its influence with President Putin and to defend the international rules and principles that it professes to support. Instead, it appears that China is moving in the opposite direction by refusing to condemn this aggression while seeking to portray itself as a neutral arbiter. And we're concerned that they're considering directly assisting Russia with military equipment to use in Ukraine. President Biden will be speaking to President Xi tomorrow and will make clear that China will bear responsibility for any actions it takes to support Russia's aggression, and we will not hesitate to impose costs.
China is the number 2 economy and the world's biggest exporter. Despite the coziness with Moscow, it also wants to play a leadership role in the world. Under growing pressure to take a side, it remains to be seen how China will balance its conflicting priorities. Well, to give us more on this story, our correspondent Susan Tarani is joining us live from New York City. Well, Susan, the Biden administration has been making it clear for some time now that there will be consequences for China if it decides to help Russia. What do you see as the likely topics during this conversation and possible outcomes from the phone call?
Yes, it seems like this administration had been planning this conversation for some time, really a conversation that Xi and Biden were scheduled to really have. That's something that really the White House wanted to drive home, but it's no secret that after that 7-hour meeting between Jake Sullivan and a top Chinese diplomat, I think it really started to gain momentum. The United States really wants to make sure that China will not backfill sanctions imposed against Russia. On the other hand, those reports that China will somehow assist Russia militarily, it really wants some kind of assurance from China that that won't happen and that China will definitely face sanctions if it decides to once again go and aid Russia in that sense. But the question is, first of all, does the United States have the support of its European allies to really make those kinds of requests from China? And on the other hand, whether or not China's economic interests would it would play a central part at the end of the day in having this conversation with the United States, and it would want some kind of assurances, and if President Biden does gain that kind of assurance that perhaps China would not, first of all, help Russia militarily, which it has denied, or, for example, it won't backfill sanctions, then what would the United States give in return? And some say that perhaps lifting those Trump-era tariffs might be one option.
And Susan, where you are in New York City, the UN Security Council is about to start its meeting, another one on Ukraine that's taken place today. It's a meeting that was called by Russia. What more do we know about what will likely take place over the next few hours there?
So this was a meeting called by Russia, as you mentioned, Nick, and at first they wanted to put a draft resolution forth regarding the humanitarian crisis to go into vote. However, we're hearing now that that vote isn't going to take place because in earnest it was going to face a backlash and opposition from the West, not because of the humanitarian of it, because in the draft resolution, it did not acknowledge that Russia started the war, and some were saying that the reason Russia was putting this resolution forth was to sort of put the West in a corner and in a bind so that it would oppose and veto a resolution against a humanitarian resolution. You know, a lot of politics and diplomacy going on in that. However, this resolution is not going to go to a vote. I think it's going to focus on the humanitarian humanitarian aspect of it and a path forward in seeing if negotiations and diplomacy can open some sort of corridor to get humanitarian aid into Ukraine, at least for a short period of time.
Thank you, Susan. That was Susan Tarani joining us live from New York City. The US president has escalated his rhetoric against the Russian leader. This time, Joe Biden has referred to Vladimir Putin as a murderous dictator and a pure thug.
The point is that, now you have Ireland and Great Britain and the Republic standing together against a murderous dictator, a pure thug who is waging an immoral war against the people of Ukraine. And Putin is paying a big price for his aggression, and they are part of the reason that his cost is going so high.
Joe Biden was speaking at the annual Friends of Ireland luncheon on St. Patrick's Day at Capitol Hill. His latest pointed attack against the Russian president comes as the situation in Ukraine continues to deteriorate. Just a day earlier, Biden called Putin a war criminal, an off-the-cuff response to a reporter's question at the White House.
After everything we've seen, are you ready to call Putin a war criminal?
No.
Are you not?
Did you ask me whether I was called? Oh, I think he is a war criminal.
Will you be meeting with him?
Ukraine wants Turkey to be among countries that offer security guarantees as part of any deal with Russia. The country has made the same request to the United Nations Security Council's 5 permanent members. This includes France, Russia, Britain and the United States, and have also made the same request to Germany.
І тому в розвиток цієї ініціативи дійсно абсолютно природно ми бачимо Туреччину серед тих країн, з якими ми хочемо домовитися про гарантії безпеки для України. Туреччина – це авторитетна держава, яка є гарантом стабільності, теж фактором стабільності в Чорноморському регіоні.
Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan recently held a phone conversation with his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin on Thursday. He repeated his offer of hosting a meeting between Putin and Ukrainian President Zelensky in Ankara or in Istanbul. Erdogan also underlined the necessity of opening humanitarian corridors to allow civilians in Ukraine to flee. The Turkish ambassador reiterated the same during his meeting in Lviv.
Dimitri Kuleba ve Sergey Lavrov'u elbette Antalya'da bir kere daha bir araya getirmekten biz mutlu olacağız bu çabalarımız doğrultusunda. Ama en kısa zamanda artık liderler düzeyinde bir buluşmanın zemininin de hazırlanması gerekiyor. Ve böyle bir liderler düzeyindeki toplantıya da ev sahipliği yapmak istediğimizi daha önce de belirtmiştik.
The Russian attacks on Ukraine are gaining momentum with each passing day, and so are the counterattacks against Russia. NATO is moving to increase security of its eastern flank, with the United Kingdom set to deploy its Sky Sabre missile system to Poland. Meanwhile, NATO troops from France, Spain and Poland carried out large-scale drills in Norway.
Cold weather terrain is something we master quite well. These temperatures are more or less what we would get in France in the winter. But here the most important is inter-allies training with foreign nations. That's not something we do very often.
It shows our deterrence, our capabilities, our commitment. And I think if you ask the soldiers here what they are here to defend, I think you will get a different answer than from the soldiers, the Russian soldiers in Ukraine, who are actually shocked that they were thinking they were participating in an exercise, and they are now killing Ukrainians.
Well, moving on to other stories, a joint space mission between Russia and Europe has taken the brunt of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. The European Space Agency has suspended its Mars mission with Russia, in line with tranches of sanctions levied at the Kremlin. In a statement, the European Space Agency said, and I quote, "While recognising the impact on scientific exploration of space, the ESA is fully aligned with the sanctions imposed on Russia by its member states." End quote. The ESA has given further authorisation for a fast-track industrial study so as to explore the available options and a way forward to implement the ExoMars rover mission.
What we decided today by my member states is that we are suspending the launch of ExoMars with the Russians, and now I was also asked by the member states to look into options. What do we do? And there are several options that we need to study, but certainly a European solution is one option. Another option is a solution with America, with NASA, that we find a joint work of sharing some of the development work, because components need to be now replaced and developed in Europe or in America, and this of course needs to be studied.
In retaliation, the Russian space agency Roscosmos suspended launches from Europe's French spaceport and said that they'll carry out the expedition independently. All European Space Agency missions using Russia's Soyuz rocket have been suspended as well. Russia has also warned that further sanctions by the West would result in the International Space Station crashing. The launch of the ExoMars mission was planned for 2020, but was postponed due to the pandemic. The mission hoped to explore any possible signs of life on planet Mars. The rover could have collected subsoil samples and sending it then for analysis. It would have been the first mission to combine the capabilities to study the distance and the depth of Mars. There's a growing wave of migration off the island of Cuba. Many have been dropping everything, and some have sold their homes, all in hopes of joining the mainland migrant highway to the United States. But the country has put new travel blocks on people trying to flee. Our next report brings you more.
Protests like this reflect growing tension and frustration in Cuba as a flood of people trying to leave the country face new travel blocks.
Every time I come to my village, 10 people have left. Relatives, friends, neighbors. It's hard to get up in the morning and find that you're not going to see them anymore.
It all started when Nicaragua lifted visa requirements for Cuba in November. Many dropped everything, sold their homes, and raced to Havana's airport, all in hopes of joining the so-called migrant highway through Central America to the United States. But that in turn led to soaring airfares along with fresh visa requirements in travel hubs like Colombia, Panama, and Costa Rica. Jorge Duani is a migration expert with Florida International University.
We see a very precarious situation for most of the Cuban population. Thousands of these people surely have no other way out of this economic crisis than to leave the country. So they seek different ways, for example, by traveling to Russia to eventually cross the border into Europe.
Cuba has blamed the United States for the uptick in illegal immigration, saying the country's policies, including the Cold War-era embargo, encourages Cubans to risk their lives to leave the island. Darnell Perez is among those who made the journey.
There were only Cubans in the buses coming from Nicaragua, Honduras, and Guatemala. There are many, thousands of migrants who are leaving. At present, the greatest dream of the Cuban youth is to leave Cuba.
More than 16,000 Cubans were apprehended at the border in February, a monthly record, according to U.S. figures.
Amazon.com has closed an acquisition deal with MGM Movie and Television Studios. Here are the details.
Amazon announced on Thursday that its $8.5 billion deal to buy the iconic MGM Movie and Television Studio was now complete, making more than 4,000 film titles, including the Oscar-nominated Licorice Pizza and James Bond franchise, part of the e-commerce giant's streaming video service. Amazon's decision to close the deal comes after a deadline passed for the U.S. Federal Trade Commission to challenge the acquisition, which was announced in May of last year. That drew antitrust scrutiny from the FTC, but Amazon said it had, quote, substantially complied with requests for information about the deal. Now, nearly a year later, Amazon is clear of regulatory hurdles. The FTC declined to comment. The European Commission approved the deal Tuesday with no conditions. In a statement, Amazon said it would welcome all MGM employees to the company and work with the studio's leadership, indicating there would not be layoffs. MGM's thousands of movie titles, including Rocky and Silence of the Lambs, and its even longer list of TV shows will bolster Amazon's Prime Video, which cost $14.99 a month in the U.S., and will help Amazon compete with streaming rivals Netflix and Disney+.
The Calderon Glacier is melting fast. According to glaciologists, it's just a matter of a few years before this once enormous glacier vanishes from the face of the Earth. We leave you with this report. I'm Nick Harper in Washington, D.C. Thanks for watching.
For the glaciologists at the Calderon, this is a race against time. Situated on the Apennine Mountains in central Italy, the Calderon is one of the southernmost glaciers in Europe. But with rising temperatures, the glacier is now melting at a faster rate than ever before. The scientists on this expedition want to scan and sample the ice of the glacier before it melts and is completely gone.
Today, this is the first step of Ice Memory project on Calderon Glacier. The first step consists of geophysical surveys to figure out how it is stratified. The glacier is not visible. Now the snow is covering it, but in springtime too it is not visible because debris has covered it entirely. So we will see only the gravel, but underneath there is the ice. Although we can't see it, we have to figure out exactly its structure and depth, so we can drill it approximately in the middle of April. The importance of this location for the Ice Memory project is essential, first of all, because the Calderon is the southernmost glacier in Europe. It is the last Apennine mountain glacier, and more importantly, this glacier can tell us the Mediterranean's climate and environmental story. This information can't really be obtained by studying other glaciers in the Alps.
The Calderon's ice is hidden under layers of snow and debris. Researchers are looking to collect older and more pristine samples. From the deeper sections of the glacier, data from the geophysical survey allow the scientists to locate the best place to drill an ice core. After further analysis, these ice cores will then be preserved and will be added to the other samples as part of the Ice Memory project.
Today we are going to use this type of tool that is a ground-penetrating radar, a tool that generates electromagnetic pulses into the ground, in this case in the glacier. The radar listens to the bouncing echo from the layers where the electromagnetic constants are different among materials. For example, we expect moving on the glacier surface to record the depth and structure between snow and ice, and between ice and rock. In this way, we can measure the thickness and reconstruct the structure of the glacier bottom.
Glaciers are considered to be the sentinels of climate change. If temperature continues to rise at the current pace, all glaciers below the altitude of 3,600 meters will disappear by the year 2100. The Calderon Glacier is located at an altitude of 2,700 meters. Glaciologists predict that Calderon, that has already split into two large chunks, could completely gone by the year 2050. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
Delle condizioni di innevamento.
many other. This is right, Arab.